This manhwa starts on a regular night in a city. Out of nowhere, an enormous crack appeared in the sky. Earth was like a broken glass where pieces of it fell and vanished into thin air before landing on the ground. A blue aura suddenly came out from the hole that quickly spread all over the world. The people called this blue aura outbreak mana. A minority of people who had good mana sensitivity earned a special ability from the effects of the mana. Those people gained powers and were called the Awakened. After that storm of mana, the sky closed but left a crack in the atmosphere. The mana outbreak did not happen again. However, when people had adjusted to the existence of the Awakened, mana storms occurred all over the world. It looks like a huge portal floating on the ground, also known as the gates. When the first gate cracks, the soldiers surrounding the gate are shocked when a huge monster breaks out from the gate. The soldiers couldn't move from the terror they were feeling. The crowd immediately ran away from the gate. They were pushing their way out of the area. A man from the back did not run away and faced the monster. From this point onwards, the world goes through a cataclysm. They all thought things would change when the mana outbreak awakened some people. A young man was running away from a roaring monster chasing him inside a mana stone cave. He looked behind and saw the monster was getting near. He thought he did not dream of being looked up to by everyone and didn't want to experience getting beaten up or stolen from anymore. Fragments he summoned created a dagger. He turned around and threw the dagger with all of his force. The blade did not even create a scratch on the monster. He watched it bounce and get stuck in the ceiling. His mouth dropped open when his plan went wrong. The monster charged at him. He was able to dodge on time, but the punch cracked the floor into small pieces. The ground shakes and the young man falls into the dark a few seconds later. He reached out and thought he just wanted to be able to use the word friend and be called one. He fell into the water and sank slowly. He thought his dream was too big of a wish for a useless D-rank maker like him. He did not move and let his body sink because he knew he would perish one day like this. A light came out from him. The water that surrounds him swirled and pushed him out of the water. The monster was already walking away from the hole when he felt a strong presence behind him. The young man was walking up the stairs he created. His strong blue aura was emitting from him visibly. The young man still did not want to vanish so powerless. The monster lifted his fists together and was about to smash him. The young man's eyes gleamed and multiple swords appeared into thin air, piercing the monster. The monster was sliced. It grunted and screamed from the pain before being sliced into small chunks of stones. He thought that if he could become stronger despite being a support, he could have had a different life. The young man had finally fulfilled all the conditions to become a player and had become an official player. He was running fast earlier that day because he was late on such an important day. He was huffing when he arrived at the meeting place of the Day 1 Guild. The woman is Kim Jimin, a fighter and a C-rank hunter, and the man sitting on a trunk is Lim Do-hwan, a tank and a C-rank hunter. Do-hwan said the newbie was late. The young man, Shin Joonseoh, was a D-rank support and a weapon creator. Do-hwan chuckled, said he was joking, and added he was not late. Jimin patted his back while they all laughed. Joonseoh sighed and felt terrible for being late for his first dungeon raid with the guild. He looked up and straightened his posture. He wanted to prove that he was useful to them. Moon Doyeon, a B-rank hunter in an assassin class, approached Joonseoh and asked if this was his first ever dungeon raid. He replied, saying this was his first time as a support. Moon Doyeon said he didn't have the ability to fight like a hunter, so he had to be more careful. He explained that he shouldn't be too far or near them and said he must keep a good distance. He asked him if he only had to make him a dagger when he signaled since he was the only one who needed an extra weapon. Joonseoh asked if he did not need any other weapons. Doyeon replied yes and told him not to overwork himself on his first dungeon raid. The guild C-ranker mage, Lee Hyunwoo, said he sensed a mana near them. They all prepared for a battle and moved in formation. Hyunwoo said he detected 3 small manas and 1 big enough to be a monster. Doyeon crossed his eyebrows and thought bosses normally don't come out of its area. He asked Joonseoh how long it would take to make a dagger. He replied and said he could make one in 20 seconds if you were hurrying. Doyen smiled and told him to start making now. The 3 crystal lizards charged towards the guild. They all smiled, excited for the battle. Doyen summoned his aura. He stomped his foot strongly and lifted his shield. He smashed the shield on the ground, causing a powerful impact that threw the crystal lizards off the ground. Jimin leaped forward and threw a powerful punch at the lizard. She flipped backward and landed swiftly as the lizard fell to the ground. She was surprised because they healed faster than they anticipated and warned her team. The tank created a barrier to protect them while the mage was creating his attack. Lee Hyunwoo showered them with multiple fireballs toward the monsters, creating a massive explosion. The mage fist bumped the air happily. Joonseoh was distracted by the amazing power he was witnessing. Doyen screamed and asked where the weapon was. He shook his head and focused on creating a dagger. After less than a minute, he successfully created the weapon. He grabbed it and threw it in Doyen's direction. Doyen heard him and caught the dagger right on time. He infused his power into the weapon, making it a shadow weapon that disappeared after a certain amount of time. The crystal lizard got near him and was about to bite him, but Doyen quickly sliced its head off its body. The head was hissing with blood and dropped to the floor. The shadow weapon disappeared right after. Do-won asked if anyone was hurt. They all replied that they were all fine. Joonseoh was speechless, thought they were a greater guild than he imagined, and said their teamwork was flawless. He could see their guild becoming a top guild with enough accomplishments. He looked at his hands and thought he wasn't of any help since he only managed to make 1 dagger. He closed his fist and wondered if he deserved to be with them. Doyen approached him and told him he did a good job. Joonseoh was surprised and awkwardly chuckled while saying, "No, thanks to you, but I wasn't helpful." Doyen tried to cheer him up and said that he'd save a lot of money from his skill since his skill consumes weapons. Joonseoh looked at him and saw Doyen's bright smile. He patted Joonseoh's shoulder and said he'd be looking forward to the next raid. He thanked Doyen while smiling happily. Do-won, the tank, approached and told them they should all pick up the loot now. They were all shocked when the floor trembled. They were all trying to keep their balance when Jimin asked if it was an earthquake. Joonseoh pointed at the stone falling from the ceiling of the dungeon. Hyunwoo moved forward and used his magic to analyze it. He told them that it seemed like a pathway connected to a place. Do-won started drooling when he heard there was a secret pathway. He excitedly told them they should all go to find a hidden treasure. Jimin jumped like a little kid while she agreed with Do-won. Doyen, from behind, was looking at them blankly and asked Hyunwoo if he could detect anything inside. Hyunwoo said no. Doyen said he did not think the place would fall apart and told them they should all be quick inside. Hyunwoo sighed and said if the guild master said yes, he'd go too. They all went marching to the pathway with Joonseoh at the back. That was when the monster appeared out of nowhere. Joonseoh couldn't remember how things ended up like this. Everyone in their guild was gone except him. This monster shouldn't have been in a D-rank dungeon in the first place. He looked behind and saw the monster caught up to him. He was thrown from a distance after receiving a powerful strike. He coughed out blood. His body was shaking while trying to get up from the pain. He noticed the monster launching for another attack, and he thought he could not perish like this. After creating a dagger, he threw it at the monster with all his strength. The blade bounced off, and the monster immediately charged toward him for another punch. Joonseoh dodged it, but the floor was shattered into pieces. He fell into the darkness and into the water. He slowly sank when he reminisced about the guild that needed him. Even if he could only create weapons, he thought he ended up leaving and abandoning those amazing people. Before closing his eyes, he wished he had never become an awakened because his dream was something he could never have attained. His eyes opened widely when a notification window popped before him. His body glowed so brightly as he stared at the window welcoming him. He was surprised when he was asked if he wanted to see the new reward. Joonseoh bit his lips and breathed out. He didn't know what was happening and clicked the yes button. He just found himself out of the water, climbing up using the stairs. He faced the monster once again, but he was different. He had inherited the experiences of his previous life. His eyes glowed as he summoned multiple swords. The blade struck the monster in different directions. Joonseoh grabbed his head when a wave of memories flashed before his eyes. He was dumbfounded about what was happening to him. He turned his gaze up and saw the monster near him. He immediately summoned a thick and strong shield to block its fist. Joonseoh was surprised that he didn't receive any damages from it. He clicked his tongue and leaped backward. He thought that if the memories he saw were correct, this golem-type monster had no particular weak points. He stared at it as a grid appeared on his pupils. It was a skill called Grid World. He used this to give it damage from multiple angles at the same time. The swords appeared from different directions, and the blades fell in the golem's direction when he closed his fist. The sword pierced it, slicing the goblin into small, big chunks of crystal stone. He approached it and sighed. He thought this Grid World skill was just an auxiliary skill that would allow him to use his creations quickly. But it seems like the skill proficiency increased so that he could use it as an attack skill. The system window popped, saying that he successfully defeated the boss. He was surprised when a glowing violet aura emerged from the golem's body and whirled into an orb. Joonseoh was unconsciously using his passive skill called Magic Absorption. He started at his palm, trying to recall the memory he saw earlier. He could see him from a few years in the future, and the whole world had fallen in that future. There were things too terrible to speak of. Outside of that, Joonseoh had absorbed all the experiences and knowledge from them. But even if it is the future, it wouldn't be the future of his world. There are too many things out of place for that now. The status screen in front of Joonseoh was something he couldn't see in his previous life. He couldn't believe he really became a player who was chosen and had an awakening. According to Joonseoh's memories, at this time, players didn't exist in this world yet. About 2 years from now, a small number of awakeners were chosen to be players. A blue screen would appear that was only visible to those who had been chosen. In the future, a mysterious thing called the system was enough to shock all the awakeners in the world. The system wasn't the only thing given to players. Every player received a different reward, like strength and skills, which was separate from what they had as awakeners. The system rewards were then used by players and caused more explosive growth compared to the other awakeners. Thanks to the work of the guild leader who was chosen as a player. Day 1 Guild, the guild Joonseoh was part of, was able to develop into a first-class guild. It was what became the catalyst for his growth in his previous turn. He thought it was convenient to stand confidently with a developing guild. If his skills and proficiency in them transferred over from his previous life, then the magic absorption skill was a skill he didn't have even in his previous turn. Joonseoh was trying to think if there was a player who had this skill. This skill accumulates energy from contaminated mana. He returned to his co-guild members and thought taking care of the body would be his priority. This tall building was the Hunters Association headquarters. The woman asked his senior if they could just send the guy home. The man peeked out of the blinders and thought it was weird that their small guild had an accident. In an unconfirmed dungeon where only the D-rank supporter had survived. The man was confused about how the supporter took care of the bodies and reported it to the association as if nothing happened. The woman turned to him and was about to ask if the D-ranker annihilated a hunter. Her senior hit her with his folder and said this wasn't a civilian case. The woman scratched her head with a teary eye like a kid. The man said hunters go missing after finding a gate. And if the hunters report it to the association, all they get is some prized money, so instead, they risk their lives and go into the dungeon secretly. He added that it would be impossible for a small guild to win a bid on a gate before leaving the woman in the room. He was walking down the hallway and looked at the player's name, Shin Joonseoh. He said those things earlier, but somehow, he had this lingering feeling that something was off. It was because Joonseoh's disposition when being interrogated was too calm. He saw an accident on his first dungeon raid, so it wouldn't be weird for him to be panicking. The man knew Joonseoh was leaving something out of his story, which frustrated him. He sighed and said to himself that it was not something for him to worry about right now. Joonseoh was walking with his eyes on his phone. He was looking for answers about how this dungeon was unconfirmed. He remembered all the members checked the gate bid form and an association stamp was on it. So maybe someone impersonated or forged the paper and fooled their guild. He thought maybe the association itself might be involved. This hasn't only happened to the Day 1 guild because unconfirmed gates with missing people cases had already become an issue. Joonseoh noticed that all the guilds on the news all have a common theme. They all included players like guild leader Moon Doyen, even prodigies that would be called heroes in the future. There is someone who wants to erase the existence of those heroes. Joonseoh had decided to hide his abilities well for now because he'd be caught red-handed if he did something suspicious. He still has 2 years until the first player selection to prepare. He needs to mobilize every skill and develop them until then. Joonseoh needed to find a way to grow without attracting too much attention. He scanned the windows, looking for a usable skill. He smiled and tapped the window when he saw the skill. 1 year had passed, and in the woods, stomping and clashing sounds lingered in the area. A blonde-haired man slashed his sword, but the monster blocked it using his shield. He was shocked when the blade of the sword suddenly cracked in half. The monster pushed him using the shield that sent him flying. The blonde man grunted in pain as he landed. He tried to stop his body from getting dragged back with his sword. He was still recovering. He was shocked to see the monster right above him, so with his quick reflex, he jumped to his right. He was huffing so hard. His guild members were all sweating cold and were trembling in fear. The monster saw them gathered in the same place. This monster is a high-ranked Gnoll Lord. The blonde-haired man stood up and pointed his broken sword at the Gnoll Lord with a shivering body. He gritted his teeth as he saw the Gnoll Lord charge toward them with blazing eyes. A lightning speed came from his back. The man used his shield to block the Gnoll Lord, but he knew that this monster was too strong for him to handle. He was getting pushed back, so he screamed, telling them that they wouldn't last if they kept blocking like this. He added that it wouldn't matter what they do as long as they try to damage it a bit. The reason Gnoll Lords were called the death god of all low-level hunters wasn't because of their superior physical abilities. Still, because these monsters of that rank are weak to magic, no matter how low-level an adventurer party is, they highly rely on magic. However, Gnoll Lords do not follow that logic. The hunters, confident with low-ranked magic, faced fear for the first time. The cost of their impudence and complacency would usually be the annihilation of the party. The blonde guy was frustrated because he was the only one with a pure physical damage dealer, but his weapon had been completely destroyed. He couldn't think of anything to attack the monster since he didn't have any spare weapon. He scratched his head and thought he should have gathered the maximum amount of people for this. His attention was caught by a person holding a pickaxe. This man is a helper who collects and transports magic stones and is also known as the team's errand boy. He suddenly remembered he had recruited a helper. He flinched when the pickaxe slowly disappeared from his palm. He wondered if this man had a make aptitude. He called the helper, and when he turned around, it was Joonseoh. The blonde man rushed toward him and asked if he could make swords. Joonseoh looked at him blankly and bluntly said yes. The blonde man showed his sword and desperately asked him to make him a sturdy sword. Joonseoh apologized and said he joined as a helper, not a support. The blonde guy was enraged and said this wasn't the time to say such things like that since they were all about to perish. Joonseoh sighed and said he had one condition, then, after they clear this dungeon, they should all forget about his ability and pay him the amount of average support. The blonde guy was dumbfounded and said, "Do you think you can clear a dungeon with just weapons? And what do you mean forget?" Joonseoh chuckled and said, "How funny." He said that good weapons are a necessary element to clear a dungeon. He added that as long as they had this element, they would be able to clear this dungeon. At the Overkill Guild, one of Korea's 3 major guilds, a woman wearing black heels was walking down the hallway. She stopped when she reached the door. When she knocked, the man inside told her to come in. The short-haired woman told the president that the Awakeners Association sent a request for cooperation. She said it was about the dungeon with rank error and the association seemed to pay whatever they wanted. The president looked at an article that successfully cleared a dungeon with rank error. He flinched when he saw a familiar face. He was certain that he had seen this man's face before. A few weeks ago, a dungeon with a rank error appeared at Seokodang, and he was certain he saw that guy there. According to the report, he was also a helper. The chances of an error dungeon and survivor are rare. The president realized this helper participated in a party where he was the only survivor in those raids, not once but twice. He squinted his eyes and said to himself that this couldn't be a coincidence. He sighed and told her that the Awakeners Association must have a headache. The woman explained that the association was receiving a lot of criticism since it was their job to guess, analyze, and announce the dungeon ranks. The president said those with trespass skills in their guild were gaining more income. The president asked if he looked into what he asked. The woman said she couldn't find any weapon whose rank was an above, but she said she had received a B-ranked weapon from a Japanese blacksmith. The president stood up and told him that weapons below rank would get destroyed as soon as he used his skill. He told her to keep looking into it for now. Their conversation was cut off when someone knocked on the door. A man came out of the door, calling Tihan the president. The president walked toward him. The man said that they had dispatched some of their newbies to a D-ranked dungeon based on the association and said the dungeon's rank changed to C after the team entered. Tihan said he could not lose his newbies and said he'd go alone. Outside, the crowd gathered around the huge red gate, guarded by suit men. The reporters looked back when they heard the Overkill Guild arrived. The camera was pointed at them, and the sound and flashes of the clicking cameras lingered around the area. The reporters immediately gathered around and attacked them with multiple questions. Catching her breath, a woman thanked the guild master Tihan for coming. She explained that the team who entered had 6 hunters, 2 supports, and 1 helper. Tihan asked how long has it been since the team entered, and she replied that it was around 2 hours. He told them, "I don't know how many people are still alive, but I'll do whatever I can." Tihan and the short-haired woman approached the gate. He dropped the weapon case he was carrying and held his hand out. The woman opened his small bag and took out a katana. This woman is named Min-hee-soo, a B-rank support, and a subspace opener class, a secretary backpack. Tihan grabbed his weapon and infused it with his power. The sword lit up with a blazing aura and slashed across the gate, activating trespass skill. The gate suddenly cracked open. This skill could knock down any wall or barrier, but only the skill caster could enter and trespass the gate. Tihan's blade suddenly cracked into pieces. Hee-soo took the sword and told her guild master to be careful. He immediately went inside the gate, and when Tihan got inside, he stopped and looked around. He noticed the temperature and humidity. He figured the monster must be a reptile, seeing how there were no pollutants on the floor. He could tell that the lizard man on the floor was quite old. Tihan leaped quickly and wished them to be alive. He couldn't help but think of the worst-case scenario, but when he arrived, he was shocked by what he saw in front of his eyes. One of the lizard men was charging, but a man blocked its sword with his blade. The woman on the side shot an arrow piercing through the monster's side. He was surprised that the kids were alive and were fighting off the monsters on their own. Tihan could tell the monster was stronger because of its movements and speed. He flinched when one of them dropped his sword. The man felt a shiver down his spine while looking at the lizard man. He couldn't move, seeing the monster above him. Tihan immediately ran, hoping it was not too late for him to protect the man. A blinding light occurred during the clash. The monster's sword clashed with a glowing sword. The monster and the man were both shocked by what happened. Tihan stopped running and looked back. He was certain that there was no weapon made midair earlier. He flinched to see a familiar face. It was Joonseoh. He flinched when he noticed a face not belonging to their team. The two stared at each other for seconds. Joonseoh started counting the team members he knew. He was dumbfounded when his counting ended up pointing at Tihan at number 10. He said that he only remembered 9 coming in. Tihan frowned his eyebrows and asked what he was doing. Meanwhile, the newbies at the back were struggling to fight off the monsters. The gray-haired guy was thrown off and landed on his butt. The mage immediately approached him for help, but the monster caught them. Tihan noticed it and launched toward it while drawing his weapon. Joonseoh didn't expect Tihan to come to the rescue himself, and wondered if the weapon he was carrying was a spare. A massive impact was felt from a distance that came from Tihan and the monster's sword. Tihan ordered the newbies to step back. The mage helped the gray-haired guy stand up and thank him. Tihan pushed his sword and threw his opponent's sword flying. He stepped back, and his sword created multiple slashes on its body in the blink of an eye. The monster's body was sliced like an onion. Tihan hasn't used all his strength, but the grade B weapon was too weak for him. He saw another lizard man approaching him, so he quickly slashed his sword against the lizard man. Joonseoh called him and asked if his sword always cracked when he used a skill. He chuckled and said, "That's some real painful wear and tear." Tihan glared at him and asked if he was trying to pick a fight. He was surprised when the helper created a new katana within a second before his eyes. Joonseoh told him to use it. Tihan was stunned by how the helper materialized this weapon with a single gesture. He was certain this weapon maker was extremely competent and skilled. He wondered how this talented guy acted as a helper. Joonseoh grabbed the broken sword and said he had one condition. After clearing the dungeon, it was to forget everything about his skills and himself. Tihan said, "Do you think I could forget just because I want to?" He was about to grab the sword when it suddenly dematerialized when he touched it. Joonseoh said that if he didn't want it, he should go and smash all his spear weapons. He sighed and ended up agreeing with Joonseoh's condition, which made him smile. Tihan grabbed the sword and ran to go wild. He aimed at a lizard near him. He infused the sword with his power and slashed the monster vigorously. The lizard man tried to block his attack, but he was surprised when his weapon was crushed into pieces. Tihan was also surprised by what happened since he only planned to deflect it. He could feel that his control over the weapon was way more than usual. He wondered if it was the weapon was that remarkably strong. Tihan gazed at the helper and thought this could manifest a B-grade weapon and above on the spot. The monster recovered and was counterattacking. Tihan stepped back and said to himself that he should see what this weapon could do if he cranked up the power. His blade pierced through the monster's abdomen, unleashing the blazing fire. He grabbed its shoulder and jumped behind him to pierce the blade on its head. The lizard man growled and grunted in pain, and when it went silent, its eyes went blank and dropped to the floor. Tihan examined his weapon and saw no scratch on it. The newbies called the guild master and were delighted to see him rescue them. Tihan said it was a relief that nobody was hurt. The newbies said that they were able to fight thanks to the weapon the helper gave to them. Tihan stared at the helper for a few seconds before asking his name. Joonseoh zipped the bag and asked what was the point in learning the name of a mere helper. Tihan introduced himself to him. Joonseoh looked at him. He stood up and faced him. Joonseoh introduced himself and told them he'd leave the mana stones at the gate entrance. Joonseoh was about to leave, but he was stopped when he walked past Tihan. He was asked to come with him to the boss's room. Tihan grabbed his weapon bag and gave it to one of the newbies. He explained that they had to defeat the boss for him to leave the dungeon. He added that no weapon could completely endure his skill. Joonseoh glared at him and blankly said that there was no way a weapon made by him would break. Tihan told him that the lizard man in this class era dungeon was far beyond average, and the boss would be the same. Joonseoh sighed once again and dropped his bag on the floor. The two went ahead and entered the boss room. The room was vast and foggy. They stopped when they spotted someone sitting on a throne with red, scaly skin. "This is the Lizard King." Tihan told him that they should put an end to this as fast as possible. Because if they took too long, their weapon might snap in two. Joonseoh scoffed and said, "I told you it wouldn't break." The Lizard King grinned at them and pointed his spear at them. The huge crawling lizard immediately targeted them with its claw. Joonseoh and Tihan dodged immediately. Tihan leaped forward for an attack. But the monster saw him coming and evaded his attack. The monster swung its tail hard and hit Tihan. But luckily, he was able to block it using his sword. He was pushed back a few meters away from the monster. He jumped high, and as well as the Lizard King, he launched into the air. The two clashed their weapons in midair. Their weapons' impact was equal, deflected them away from each other. The Lizard King grabbed the leash of the crawling lizard and made it burst fire from its mount. Tihan was surprised when a gigantic shield appeared before him to block it. Joonseoh summoned it, and he dematerialized it when the fire was gone. Tihan got hit by the monster and was sent flying backward. He landed near Joonseoh and asked. Joonseoh replied that a shield could also become a weapon. Tihan smirked and told him he'd ask more when they got out of there. He launched forward quickly. The Lizard King suddenly summoned a chain crawling its way to Tihan. The chain caught his sword, so he wasn't able to move it. The Lizard King pulled the chain, and Tihan got dragged by the chain. Joonseoh lifted his hand and told him not to play around. Tihan smirked when he noticed a materializing weapon in his other hand. He mocked Joonseoh and said he was the one who told him to test it out. Tihan grabbed the sword and let go of the other sword. He slashed his new sword twice against the monster's mouth. The Lizard King was surprised by the sudden changes of movement by the human. Tihan threw the blade at the Lizard King. The king tilted his body to the side to evade it. But he was shocked when the human was already before his eyes. Tihan kicked him with all of his strength. The Lizard King dropped to his butt. So Tihan immediately swung his sword back and unleashed the blazing power from it. The Lizard King was burned, and its left arm was cut off. But suddenly, he noticed Joonseoh standing from the back. The Lizard King did not hesitate to grab his weapon and attack Joonseoh. When the tip of the spear got near him, a barrier blocked it. The Lizard King was dumbfounded and went shivering when he saw his look of Joonseoh. Tihan glared at him from the back with his blazing aura. The Lizard King was doomed. There were still reporters waiting outside the gate. They were all surprised when the gate slowly turned blue, indicating it was opening. Tihan and the others walked out of the gate unscathed. The reporters came swarming in them, asking multiple questions. Hisu asked Tihan if he was hurt anywhere, and he said that he was fine. The newbies thanked their guild master for saving their lives. While they were all busy, Joonseoh gave the bag and said he had already received the payment before leaving. A reporter approached Tihan, asking how he managed to clear the dungeon. He looked behind when he said it was not him who cleared it. But he was gone when he was looking for Joonseoh. The newbies explained that their guild master dealt with them all since their weapons were destroyed. He turned around and asked the newbie what he was talking about. He said that the person who kept making their weapons allowed them to last longer. The newbie was confused and asked whom he was referring to. Tihan frowned his eyebrows and said their helper was the weapon maker. But the newbie got more confused. He asked the archer if the helper they recruited could make weapons. The woman replied, saying she was not sure. Tihan asked, "Didn't you all see how that helper made weapons?" The newbie asked if he was referring to the pickaxe. Tihan was confused because he was certain they all received weapons from Joonseoh. He wondered why does it seem like the newbies forgot. His eyes widened when he realized it was rental pay. He wondered how that helper used a skill exclusive to a rank. Tisu and the man beside him got worried when they saw Tihan. Tihan tossed his bag at the man and sprinted away. They were all shocked and confused by what happened. Tihan was running as fast as he could to find Joonseoh. He looked around but did not see even his shadow. He stopped when he realized he wouldn't be able to find that person like this. Joonseoh was hiding behind the bricked wall, and luckily Tihan stopped looking for him. Tisu and the man holding his bag caught up to him. Tihan turned to them and said, "I need you to find someone." A few days after that day at the Overkill headquarters, Tisu came to the president to report that she found Shin Joonseoh's location. She said that Joonseoh entered a D-rank dungeon with his party at Songpagu. Tihan said Songpagu was not too far from them. Tisu suddenly asked why he was so interested in a D-ranked maker. He took his tablet out and looked at Joonseoh's status and background. His information said he's a D-rank, but the rental pace skill refutes all of it. The rental pace skill is exclusively for rankers. Tihan wondered why Joonseoh only used this great ability to hide his identity. A weapon maker like that could easily achieve a level like this. Tihan looked at his hand and remembered the time he held that weapon he made, where he could finally use his full power without breaking the weapon. Tihan had met countless blacksmiths referred to as the greatest blacksmiths. He remembered the day he met one of the greatest blacksmiths. He infused the sword with his power. The sword immediately radiated with a flaming aura. Tihan tightened his grip on the handle and slashed it in front of him. He crossed his brows while looking at the shattered sword. He repeated this on all of the swords, but nothing survived. The blacksmith was shocked and hurt seeing all his greatest work broken by a single person. None of the greatest blacksmiths Tihan met could fulfill his expectations. The creation ability of makers was limited to the form of normal weapons. But the weapons Joonseoh created greatly exceeded the limitations of abilities and forms. As if such limitations didn't exist. He thought it might be possible if it's Joonseoh's abilities. That which he couldn't use because he didn't have a proper weapon. He asked Tisu about his remaining schedule for the day. She said he still had a meeting at 7 p.m. with a guild master. Tihan got up and told her to cancel the meeting. Inside the dungeon, a monster was screeching from the pain of the blade slashing at him. The armored guy was so impressed by the weapon made by their helper. He was surprised because it could destroy the boss weapon. So he thought this weapon would be at least a B-rank quality. He was thankful to their helper for making them new weapons. He told his team he had never seen a sword of that quality before and thanked Joonseoh. He consulted the blonde woman if they should recruit him to their guild. The woman said it would be a good idea since it would be a shame he's going around as a helper. Joonseoh could hear them talking and thought this party struggled. Even though they did not enter an error dungeon. He looked at the mana stones and remembered the day he lost his guild members. He said it wouldn't have been like this if he had just had mana left that time. He remembered that incredible man he felt inside the dungeon. But it had never happened again. He looked at his hand and thought what he felt right now was no better than a D-ranked awakeness mana. His past life's memories helped so much when he was making a specific object. Although it's a very intuitive skill where the quality is proportionate to the mana used. Another method could help raise the performance of this skill that wasn't known yet. And that's the level of understanding. The higher your understanding of the object being created is, the higher the quality is. When the quality rises, the mana efficiency also rises. After that hidden ability was revealed, he remembered undergoing harsh training, material research, training from a hunter as support, going to workshops, and receiving weapon creating lessons. Joonseoh doesn't know how much better it had gotten. But compared to the mana being used, this level of quality isn't just additional. Mana gears were too expensive for him. So there was no way he could get them right now. So he used mana potions instead. With a helper pass, buying mana potions was still a struggle. Because nobody wanted to accept a D-ranked maker as a support. He looked at the mana absorption skill. And there's only around 20% left until it hits its accumulation goal. One dungeon clear is only 1% of mana. So the only remaining method to hit his accumulation goal was to enter a rank error dungeon. He remembered the previous error dungeon that would have been difficult if Tihan hadn't been there. Their party moved to the boss room and cleared it within an hour. They all got out of the dungeon unscathed. They all thanked each other and bid goodbyes before parting ways. Joonseoh used rental pay on them and erased their memories. His eyes widened when he heard a familiar voice call his name. He turned around and saw Tihan approaching him. Tihan asked if Joonseoh still remembers him. Joonseoh realized the rental pay didn't work on him since he could still remember him. Tihan gave him his business card. Joonseoh took the card and asked what business he had with him. Tihan told him that he had something to talk about with him. He figured Tihan was the guild master of the Overkill Guild, one of Korea's top 3 guilds. He thought he could not get involved in such a big guild yet. He doesn't want to attract attention. He told him he didn't have time and had a prior dinner appointment. He knew that being in a top guild would resolve his money problems, but it would also place a large target on his back, since he saw that heroes were being annihilated in the future. Tihan grabbed his shoulder to stop him and told him he wouldn't regret this conversation, and that the dinner would be on him. Hisa glared at Joonseoh while he was asking Tihan why he had lots of time for a D-rank supporter. He didn't like it but wanted to confirm how much rental pay had worked for him. He agreed to talk to him for a while, which made Tihan smile. They went to a restaurant nearby for dinner. Joonseoh took his chopstick and asked why the guild master wanted to talk to him. Tihan said that he has a berserker class with a limit of needing a weapon that could withstand his power. He added that as a berserker, it was important for him to find a supplier of weaponry that matches with them. Tihan explained that he met many top blacksmiths and weapon makers, but every weapon they gave to him could not withstand his full abilities. He said there was only one exception, which was the sword Shin Joonseoh created that day. Joonseoh confirmed that the rental pay didn't work on Tihan, so he figured he had to be careful when using it on higher-level hunters. He did not mutter words. So Tihan said he would be straightforward and asked if he would like to join his guild. Hisa was shocked and speechless. Tihan promised he'd receive the best treatment if he accepted his offer. He said they would give him a contracting fee of 10 billion won, and pay him separately for his operation expenses and dividends. He added that the contracting fee would rise by 10% every year. His words were cut off when Joonseoh said, "I am sorry." He stood up and said he did not plan on joining a guild at the moment. He thanked them for the food and said he would take his leave now. Tihan tried to stop him from leaving, but it was too late. Hisa asked why he made an offer like that for a D-ranker. He told Hisa that if she had experienced what he did, she wouldn't be able to talk like that. He told Hisa that the weapon Joonseoh made could withstand his full power. Hisa realized that regardless of them getting destroyed from being unable to withstand the pressure if it weren't above a certain rank, the guild master's abilities wouldn't even be able to be released. Hisa said that his contracting fee would be nothing if possible, since not even one of the greatest blacksmiths could do that. Tihan placed his cup on the table and said regardless of what he had to offer him, he wanted to recruit him at all costs. Joonseoh sighed, thinking that this day would come when he would reject a scouting offer from a top 3 guild. He knew joining that guild would be a big help, but it would be too early for him now. He thought he should wait patiently since he'd come and find him again. All the monsters are defeated inside a dungeon, but another monster arises. The man was shocked to see his party members get slashed individually. He was huffing for air while asking who he was. The monster said most of the heroes he faced whined and begged him to save them. This monster with long blue hair was one of their party members. He asked why he was trying to wipe the party out. The monster said he'd tell him if he would defeat him. He laughed devilishly and grinned at him. The man gritted his teeth because he knew this person would be a difficult opponent. He charged forward bravely. And when he slashed his sword, the monster blocked it with his sword. The man stepped back and was about to throw another attack, when the monster glared at him and tossed his sword. The man was caught off guard when he lost his grip on his sword. The monster swung his leg and kicked him on his side. The man flew a few meters away and smashed his back on the wall. He trembled in pain and fear as he watched the monster approach him. The monster commented on his bravery. The man crawled, apologizing and telling him to spare his life. He just grinned and sliced his neck swiftly. He looked around with disappointment on his face, as he thought he'd get to fight for the first time in a while. He said that it wasn't even good enough as a warm-up. He looked at the man's head and told him he'd report to the association, that he fought bravely against the boss and perished heroically. He took a photo of his face while grinning. He looked at the collection he made one by one, when he suddenly felt a familiar shiver down his spine. He knew that the priestess had arrived. The door opened, and a woman with long pink hair and a glowing dark purple aura entered. The priestess said she heard there were precious ingredients there, so she came quickly. The blue-haired man told her there were no precious ingredients, since all the members were all idiots. He told her not to listen to that person, who told her that precious ingredients were there. The priestess glared at him and asked him if he would dare to go against that person's wishes. The blue-haired man clicked his tongue and told her to clean things up well. He reminded her not to forget the promise she made, that she'd let him go against an S-ranked hunter. The priestess summoned a circle and told him she'd contact him soon. The hole on one of the bodies suddenly glows red. A gigantic hand came out of the hole. Blood was hissing all over the place as it crawled out of the hole. The priestess' eyes were sparkling after seeing the monster that came out. Outside the dungeon, the gate was surrounded by the people and guards. Joonseoh was surprised to see a familiar face as soon as he arrived. A man wearing a cap and mask saw him. It was Tihan wearing a disguise. Joonseoh asked him why he was there. Tihan said he had a good eye for recognizing him right away. Joonseoh said he was the only person he knew who carries around a weapon case like that. Tihan said he was there to attack the gate, since the guild member who was supposed to go and suddenly got sick and came there as a sub. Their conversation was interrupted when a man near the gate called them and said it was time to go. Tihan started walking, heading to the gate. Joonseoh sighed and thought he would need to adjust his plan now. The party went inside the gate with Joonseoh and Tihan at the back. Tihan looked at Joonseoh and asked why he wouldn't join their guild. Joonseoh blankly said he rejected that offer and didn't want to talk about it anymore. He flinched when he heard their party member ahead of him talk about the auction of the S-ranked gate in Chuncheon. They say that the Hyunmu guild got it in one go. Joonseoh wondered why the guild bought a S-ranked gate. Tihan asked if he was interested in buying gates. He added that if he joined their guild, he could easily purchase special gates above B rank. To Awakeners, your guild was quite important. One can receive the envy and adoration of the public and receive incomparable revenue and rewards compared to other Awakeners. You can get an entrance ticket in the cases of high special gates. There's a big influence of not just talent but its dynamic relationship with politics. And the structure makes it so that the rare treasures you can earn through those places are seized naturally by the big guilds. Tihan said that Joonseoh must have a goal he was working on, and said it'd be easier for him to achieve it with the backing of their guild. Joonseoh cut him off and said it was none of his business. He looked at him and said he knew why he was so persistent since no one had ever rejected an offer from their guild. Tihan was speechless. Joonseoh made it clear that he wouldn't enter any guild and started walking away from him. Tihan tilted his head down and thought Joonseoh might be like this due to the trauma from his previous guild. but he was not planning on giving up on him. Their party moved ahead, with the mage leading and lighting up their way. They were surprised when small spider webs suddenly appeared along their way. As they went deeper, more spider webs were found. They stopped when the man with a shield on his back said the monster's territory was near, and said they all looked nervous. He said that the monsters that appeared there were legion spiders, and there were approximately 60 of them. According to the result of the report, these legion spiders have paralysis poison in their fangs. Tihan squatted and took out his weapon. He told Joonseoh to stick to him closely. Joonseoh sighed and told him not to worry about a helper. Tihan told them that they should all follow the rule that all combatants must protect the team's support and helper. One of their members screamed, saying the monsters were coming. They all went to a defense position. But when they looked up and in front of them, they saw spiders crawling their way to them. One of them was trembling while telling himself to stay calm. This six-eyed legion spider's danger level changes according to the size of the legion. The spiders attacked, hissing with poisonous fangs. The man's foot shifted and slashed the spider in half. He grunted as he saw the green blood hiss out of its body. The spider was blocked using the huge shield. The tank infused his power on the shield and pushed them back. The mage lifted her wand and struck the spider near her range. Tihan watched them and thought they were not bad for AD rank. They heard clicking from above, and when they looked up, they saw swarming venomous spiders. The spider jumped at them. So Tihan used his power immediately, slashing and burning those within his range. The burnt spider fell to the floor unconscious. Each spider's durability was quite low, even among the ranked monsters. So Tihan would only need to use a bit of his power on his sword. Tihan flinched when he heard the others screaming for help. He saw them caught in the middle of the swarm of the legion spiders. The tank was exhausted because the monsters wouldn't stop coming. The mage was at her limit for mana, and the swordsman was exhausted. Tihan immediately sprinted and called Joonseoh to follow him. But Joonseoh walked away. Tihan stopped and was about to call him again when a spider jumped at Joonseoh, who was very calm at the moment. Tihan leaped and shouted at him to get down. Joonseoh was calmly walking. He tilted his head up, and when he opened his eyes, his pupils were gridded. A grid was summoned above the spider, and a gushing sword pierced its body. Tihan was shocked after seeing it. Joonseoh couldn't summon multiple swords and pour it all in to end them all. But it's impossible with the amount of mana he have right now. A window popped before him. He swiped and took summon a weapon. He controlled the glowing sword using the tip of his finger. He looked to his side and pointed his finger at the incoming spiders. The spider was struck and instantly perished. Joonseoh swayed his finger so the sword would also sway and slice the spiders that went along its way. Joonseoh's body was flaming with his blue aura while controlling the sword. This skill left Tihan in awe. It was like a work of art. Tihan's eyes widened, and he was still speechless after witnessing an incredibly large area attack. The sword stopped and landed on the remaining legion spider near them. Tihan watched the sword vanish into thin air. He thought the time required in battle was at least 10 seconds. But Joonseoh dealt dozens of spiders. He looked at Joonseoh and thought this person was a talented support who could fight in the first place. He flinched when Joonseoh asked him why he wasn't helping the others. Tihan suddenly remembered the others still having a hard time holding off the legion spiders. He infused the sword with his power and told Joonseoh they would talk properly after things were resolved. Joonseoh told him to handle the situation behind him since people wouldn't think a helper did all of that. Tihan took off his mask and launched towards them. After a few minutes, they all annihilated the legion spiders. The tank guy said he found Tihan familiar from the beginning and didn't realize it was the guild master of Overkill Guild. Tihan apologized for not telling them in advance since he had come there to investigate the dungeon. The mage stood up straight and said they all survived because of him. Her cheeks turned red while saying Tihan was so cool when he dealt with the spiders in one go. She was about to ask to have a picture with Tihan when their swordsman and Joonseoh arrived. The swordsman was holding a lamp and said they had already collected the byproducts and noticed no signs of monsters in the area. He added that there was another pathway right out front that they hadn't checked. The tank stood up and said they should stop the raid there since the number of legion spiders and the dungeon's geography differed from what he saw in the report. Dungeons exist past gates, separate from the world. Dungeons have bizarre creatures and geographic features that can't be seen on Earth. At this time, the concept of dungeons in Awakened aren't perfectly set up. There weren't many Awakened who could adjust to the environment of dungeons, and that's how the concept of scouts came to be. Awakened with the ability to detect or hide their traces gathered and started receiving dungeon report commissions. The dungeon clear rate began to rise significantly after these report commissions, and they began to be called scouts. The tank said the report's accuracy was more than 98%, so this mistake was unlikely. The swordsman asked if it would be okay to continue since they had the guild master of Overkill Guild with them. The tank told him he understood his desire to continue the raid, but receiving the guild master's help once was enough, so they should be careful. The swordsman and the mage said they really wanted to clear this dungeon because they had their own situation. The tank asked if that reason was more important than their life because there was no turning back once they entered a boss room. He was surprised when Tihan said he was fine with it. Tihan said he came there to investigate, and he also had to go into the boss room anyway. The tank bowed before him and said, "Then I'll shamelessly request this of you." Tihan told him he should continue to lead the party as they did at the start. The tank grabbed his shield strap and led the way to the boss room. The others followed him immediately. As they went to the pathway to the boss room, they did not notice anything different. They stopped in front of the door, so the tank started briefing them. He said that the Legion Queen Spider has a danger level of D, and her overall battle ability at the moment was quite low. The Legion Queen Spider was considered an easy boss that mainly breeds Legion Spiders. He pushed the door and reminded them that what he said was the original information, so they did not know what organism would come out later. The door opened slowly. They went inside with the mage lighting up their way. An ominous, eerie air lingered around the area. Tihan doesn't sense any particular abnormal signs. The tank told them to prepare themselves when he spotted the boss. The Legion Queen Spider was huge. They were all relieved because the boss was still the same. The mage created an orb at the tip of her wand and threw it at the gigantic spider. The spiders were struck perfectly. The mage punched in the air happily, but her eyes widened to see the boss drop to the ground unconsciously. They did not expect that the boss would instantly perish. The tank got anxious, but when he was telling his team to retreat, they felt this frightening aura. The tank was sweating after he felt it. The purple feet of a gigantic spider landed on the lifeless spider. The spider screeched with a high-pitched voice. She is Queen Arak, who commands all spider-type monsters with a danger level of B+. Arak looked at them with her devilish smile. They were trembling in fear as they watched its arm charging towards them. Tihan was quick enough to deflect the arms of Arak. The queen wasn't happy with what he did. Tihan knew sloppy swordsmanship wouldn't damage the queen. His sword already had cracks, but he needed to do the most damage possible in a single blow. He jumped and slashed the sword with his power infused on it. The sword shattered instantly after the blow, so Tihan wasn't able to deliver a fatal strike. The queen's arm charged toward Tihan, who was weaponless. Luckily, Joonseoh materialized the sword to block it. The three were shocked to see their helper doing this incredible thing. Joonseoh told Tihan to stall for some time with it while he made a proper weapon. Before that happened, Joonseoh was at the back trying to make a proper sword as soon as he saw cracks on Tihan's blade. But he already uses up all of his mana. He took the mana potion from his pocket and drank it. As for mana potions, he could only handle drinking 1 bottle daily because if he exceeded that, the potion could be addictive. The mana burst out from his body when it was absorbed. He was on time to materialize a sword to protect Tihan from Arak. Joonseoh expected a SSS-Rank monarch spider to come out of this error dungeon. They were lucky that Tihan joined them because facing Arak with these people would have been difficult. Tihan was stalling time at the moment. Arak was smiling, seeing how the human was able to catch up with her movements. Joonseoh knew they could not just rely on Tihan. He told them to get up. The tank asked who he was. The swordsman asked why someone talented like him participated as a helper. Joonseoh looked at them and said there was something they needed to deal with first. He used his powers to materialize a sword, wand, and shield before their eyes and asked them if they would grab the weapon and continue to fight or run away and wait outside. Joonseoh looked at them straight to their eyes and said he trusted they would be able to make a wise decision. The swordsman slashed the spiders. He noticed an incredible increase in his performance using the sword given to him by the helper. He thought that he'd never held a weapon like this. He slashed the spider like he was cutting a piece of paper. He flinched when he felt an enormous power coming from his back. It was the mage. She smiled while infusing the wand with her power and blasted the spiders with it. The tank noticed that the power of her skill increased several-fold after changing the weapon. A question kept ringing inside their head. Who is that person? Green blood was dripping on the blade Tihan was holding. He was huffing for air as he glared at Arak. The queen started chuckling. She screeched and attacked Tihan once again. Tihan tightened his grip and thought he needed to end things as quickly as possible. The queen stopped when she noticed a sudden change in the human's power. Arachne was countering Tihan's attack, but it was too late for her. The spider queen's head was sliced off. The body and its head dropped to the ground. Tihan checked the sword to see if it cracked and was still fine. The sudden, strange movements of the spiders caught his attention. The mage asked where the spiders were going. They noticed the Legion spiders were headed towards the guild master. Tihan told them to back up when he noticed the Legion spiders were headed to the queen. The Legion spiders crawled inside Arachne, and with the lives of these spiders, it'll transfer their life to their queen. Arachne's eyes opened, grinning at them. She slammed her hands on the floor and pushed her body up. Tihan realized Arachne would just revive endlessly unless they finished them all off. Tihan has to increase his firepower and finish things in one go as soon as possible. He cursed when he felt a crack on his sword. Joonseoh said that Tihan was more amazing than he thought and never thought he would destroy a sword he made. The huge sword was summoned before them. Joonseoh said this was the most durable weapon he could make right now. Tihan grabbed the sword. As soon as he felt the sword, he knew he could defeat them all in one go with this weapon. He pierced the sword to the ground, and a web-like foam lit up under him. Tihan smiled and grabbed the sword with both of his hands. He lifted the blazing sword and charged toward the Legion Queen's spider quickly. He jumped and slashed his explosive strike at Arachne. Blood squirted out of its flesh. Joonseoh watched the monster's body sliced in half. He could tell this was the first time Tihan had used this skill properly, in place of receiving overwhelming power. This skill results in the user losing their rationality, since it would have been hard to deal with the risk of all that follows after the weapon shatters. Looking at Tihan, he was overflowing with his suppressed power that he couldn't release ever since. He started huffing for air, but fire came out of his mouth when he exhaled. He screamed as his power exploded. Fire burst out of his body. He cooled down as soon as he expelled all of the excessive power. He huffed for air and thought his rationality could have been consumed without releasing all of those. His hands were shaking. He figured this was the second time this had happened since his awakening. He looked at Joonseoh and thought he was no standard awakened. The moment the whole world knew about his ability, the whole world would focus on him. They looked at the Legion Queen Spider's burning body. Joonseoh saw the overwhelming amount of mana coming out of Arachne that you can't compare with the other dungeon-era bosses. Joonseoh asked Tihan if he felt something from the corpse. Tihan said that since they got rid of all the remnants, she won't be back to life. When he got near, he absorbed the mana from the corpse. The accumulation target had finally reached its goal, allowing him to obtain a new skill called demonic weapon production. This skill would allow him to create demonic weapons from the demonic realm. Joonseoh cannot remember any concept of the demonic realm. Thanks to Arachne, Joonseoh already reached half of the mana necessary, and it doesn't seem like the rewards would end with this. Tihan called Joonseoh and said he had something to tell him. Tihan apologized to him. Joonseoh was surprised to hear him say he was being impolite by being rude and persistent and asking him to join his guild. Joonseoh was dumbfounded. The tank saw them talking and was shocked to see the guild master of Overkill bowing his head to a deranked helper. He shook his head and thought this helper must be a hidden talent of the Overkill guild. He flinched when he heard the swordsman and mage approaching. The swordsman waved at him, saying there were no remnants left and the weapon from the helper was awesome. The mage asked if the helper was related to the Overkill guild. The tank jumped at them and tried to push them. He told them they should leave now. The two were confused as to why the tank was acting like this. The tank shoved them, telling them they should leave this disgusting place first. The tank figured that their helper was related to the Overkill guild, so they shouldn't get involved with them to avoid problems. The tank wondered why that helper revealed that kind of power so easily. Joonseoh sighed and agreed to talk with him. He reminded him that a guild master shouldn't bow his head in front of anyone. Tihan said he won't be bothering him and following him around anymore. He added that that didn't mean they were giving up and asked him again to sign a contract with them. Tihan said he was certain he'd like the conditions they'll provide. The next day, in the morning, Joonseoh came to the Overkill guild to meet Hisu. Hisu greeted him and said she was in charge of the contract proceedings. Joonseoh said he didn't know the guild master would contact him immediately the next morning. He asked where they were, and Hisu said it was a special reception room in the headquarters. She told him not to worry about leaks since this room has high security. Hisu placed the contract on the table and asked him to read it. Joonseoh scanned the paper carefully, just as Tihan said in the dungeon. He smiled, placed it back on the table, and said he had no issues, so they would proceed as is. Tihan told him he would make him an unofficial support of their guild. He said. Tihan added that they could secretly supply him with materials, gears, ingredients, and gate rights. Joonseoh asked why he was being so kind. Tihan said the only condition for him was he would have to help him solve commissions he would give. And if Joonseoh didn't like the commission, he could also refuse it. Joonseoh crossed his arms and asked what he would do if he didn't help him. Tihan said it would be fine because he just wanted to make a connection with him to their guild and block him from joining other guilds. They stopped when they heard footsteps approaching them. The sweet men asked if their guild master was okay. Tihan told Joonseoh that they should move out now and hoped he would receive a positive response from him. He looked back and said his ability was more valuable than he offered. Joonseoh didn't plan on joining a guild in the first place. Regardless, the conditions were good for him, so he signed the contract. He asked when he could receive the support, and Hisu said he could start now. Hisu placed the box on the table and said it was a present from the guild master. Joonseoh took it and opened it. The purple aura shined from the box when he opened it. He closed it and hid it inside his bag. He took out a list and handed it to Hisu, saying this was the list of support materials he'd like for now. Hisu checked the list and said these materials would not help him much. Joonseoh said he wouldn't use it. He stood up and said he had someone else to give them to. Joonseoh went to the association and waited in the lobby. He looked at the time and thought she would come around this time. A woman with long blonde hair came out. Joonseoh looked at her as she approached him. The timid woman wearing a black dress on top of her white long sleeves was an rank hunter named Haya. Back in the day, a blasting arrow came out of nowhere and struck the monster with 2 heads. The person who shot the arrow jumped out of the tree, and it was Haya. After the player selection, the hunter prodigy was called the God Archer. A timid nerd-looking girl from earlier was a hottie back in her days. Haya walked to the information desk. She greeted them with a stuttering voice while requesting a training use gate entrance. She placed her ID on the desk, and they instantly saw that Haya was an rank hunter. They asked if they should get a SSS-Rank training gate for her. She scratched her cheeks and said she wanted to get a D-ranked one. They were surprised to hear her request, and when they saw her records, she barely had any experience since she had only gone into the gates a few times. They could already tell that Haya would be demoted soon. An Awakener's first rank was based on their unconditional mana amount. The more mana their body can hold, the better the abilities they manifest. So, the association began to analyze the amount of the awakened mana, and started dividing people into ranks based on their mana. Their rank isn't fixed, and they can get promoted by the association. The opposite could happen as well. Rankers could get demoted. Haya handed out the form she had filled. The woman asked if she had a partner she was going with, and Haya replied none. The woman said she'd put her on the recruitment list, because 2 people were the fewest to enter the gates. Haya wasn't able to complain and asked if she could go alone. The woman said she had to have a license permit for soloing gates. Haya chuckled awkwardly and said she'd just wait. She walked away from the desk when the woman called again, reminding her about her first hunter qualification renewal in 1 month. To renew her rank hunter qualification, Haya needed to either have several experiences with C-ranked or above gates, or pass the A-ranked actual test. Haya sighed because she knew that, in her case, she had to take the actual test soon. Joonseoh suddenly received a message from the association about the D-ranked gate. Haya walked nervously while checking her phone for an update on her request. She thought that she should have just requested online. She sighed and calmed herself. She said to herself that she would be entering a D-ranked gate, so what happened last time wouldn't happen again. Her phone vibrated when a message came to her. She opened it, and she was recruited to enter a D-ranked gate. Haya went to the location of the gate after wearing her gear. She thought it felt awkward since it had been a while since she had worn this. A person approached her, asking if her name was Haya. She turned around and was greeted by Joonseoh. He said he would be the support. Haya bowed quickly as she introduced herself. Joonseoh knew her. He knew that Haya had failed some tests, and she was the only Awakener demoted to C-rank. After she was chosen as a player, she was able to find her hidden talent. Joonseoh smiled because he knew what talent she possessed, and decided to awaken Haya's talent today. The 2 entered the dungeon. They saw a bunch of goblins roaming around the forest, so they hid behind the bushes. She wondered if the goblins already left. She looked at the watch she bought, an equipment that senses a monster's mana. She turned to Joonseoh and asked if it was okay for him to finish the monsters alone. Joonseoh sat his butt on the floor and said it would be fine. He looked at her and said he could at least provide her arrows if she needed help. Haya got up and positioned her arms carefully. She has been doing this again for a long time, calming herself. When she released the arrow, it went like a lightning bolt. The goblin did not notice and got hit on his head. The others could dodge and were about to counterattack when Jia sent another attack. The goblin dodges to their side. Joonseoh thought her pure destructive power exceeded an rank hunter by far, but it was meaningless if she couldn't aim. She took another arrow from her back and was about to release another attack, when he heard the horn was blown off by one of the goblins. She was speechless because she realized more goblins arrived. She was stoned when her watch started vibrating. She rolled her eyes and saw the goblins had already surrounded her. She panicked and didn't know what she should do next. The goblins began to run towards her, but she couldn't think straight. The goblins near her suddenly got pierced by swords that Joonseoh summoned. He approached Haya and said she needed her help. Haya was surprised that her supporter was able to do this thing. She asked if he was a D-ranked make. Joonseoh said yes, and that he couldn't last long alone, so he needed Haya's help. Joonseoh pointed to their right and asked her to shoot an arrow there with all the power she had left. Haya did not hesitate and released all her powers in that direction. She trusted his plan. The arrow cleared the monsters in that area and created a pathway. Joonseoh grabbed her wrist when the goblins started charging again towards them. Joonseoh told her they should run. He smiled as he pulled her and escaped the goblins. They managed to escape the goblins and arrived at the entrance of a cave. Haya felt as if rather than escape the goblins, they couldn't approach them any further. It was as if there was something where they were. So much has happened that her head couldn't follow, but she wondered why Joonseoh was so calm. Haya suggested that they should end things here today and the compensation they talked about earlier will be honored. Joonseoh cut her off saying they can't leave yet. Joonseoh continued that since the goblins are in the area, they'll stay for a while. It'll be dangerous to leave right now. And I think we dropped the rescue flare we were provided while running. Haya wanted to know when the goblins will leave. Half a day, but depending on the situation we might have to wait longer. Haya screamed in panic, half a day. Of course that was a lie, thought Joonseoh. They will disperse in 30 minutes at most. They're not monsters with that much coordination to begin with. Although the reason is kind of a stretch, the current Haya seems like she believed me regardless of what I say. The problem was Joonseoh needed Haya to go in the cave with him, but he doubts it. At the same time, Haya apologized saying it was her fault. Had she fought the goblins properly, they wouldn't be in this situation. If you're sorry, please fulfill my requests. A request? We have a lot of time, so why don't we talk about it in there? As they walk in the dark cave illuminated by the blue crystals, Haya was wondering if Joonseoh really needed her help. While I am an A rank, I don't have much experience in dungeons. And I can't even understand what you're trying to say, an elite monster, just how? Ah, you said it was your first time in a training gate. Joonseoh continued on that it makes sense that you don't know about this information. Instead of having a boss monster in this dungeon, there is a monster in the rank below a monster boss called Elite, and this is its habitat. Joonseoh also said Haya is the first person to accept a support into a party. Haya thought about it's the right thing to help him, since if it weren't for Joonseoh, she wouldn't have been able to escape the goblins. And she also knows how painful it is to join a party. Haya's watch alert them as they reach their destination, face to face with the elite monster. Haya immediately stepped in front of Joonseoh and aimed an arrow at the elite monster. She shoot the arrow with a blue aura, but it made no damage to the monster. She prepared another arrow, but she froze in place, unable to shoot. She flinched as the elite monster approached them. Joonseoh grabbed her collar from behind and pulled her away as the monster was about to strike. The monster struck its weapon but misses, but Haya thought Joonseoh was struck by the monster. This situation made Haya remember of when she was in a party. She remembered when she was ostracized from joining any party. This was after an incident with her party falsely accused her for almost killing a team member. At the same time, the monster moves towards Haya as Joonseoh commented that acting isn't really his thing. A sword with blue aura swung and attacked the monster. Joonseoh thought of how he's laid the board. In an urgent situation like this, it will have no problem activating. All that's left is to buy time. Joonseoh told Haya to look properly at the monster. She will be able to see something. Shoot an arrow towards there with all the power you have. Joonseoh's words fade out as Haya felt something. She closes her eyes and calms herself. She couldn't explain what it was, but her senses were bristling. It felt uncomfortable, but she saw it clearly. Her left eye emitted a golden aura as she willed herself with determination. With all her might, she aimed and shot her arrow. The arrow emitted a golden aura as it flew at the elite monster. The monster stared at the incoming arrow with wide eyes. It pierced the monster, obliterating it completely. The elite monster fell to the ground with a huge hole in his stomach oozing green blood. Haya huffed a sigh of relief when she heard Joonseoh saying that it will be unfamiliar. The feeling of your senses amplifying throughout your body. Joonseoh continued that although this method was a bit extreme, it had to be done in order to awaken you. I needed to awaken this feeling up. Haya was still confused and in dazed asked Joonseoh who he was and how it seems like he predicted all that happened.
Oh?
And what do you mean awaken? Joonseoh replied to not rush things because they have a lot of time. Haya was quick to notice that Joonseoh was trying to change the subject. But she felt a sudden pain in her head. She held her head as she blacked out. Joonseoh huffed continuously as he carried Haya on his back. He said to himself that it's so hard to make colleagues, but at least he has resolved one thing. Outside the cave, Haya sat down with her head on her knees. She apologized for her behavior, saying she can't believe she showed such discourtesy to someone who saved her twice. Joonseoh flinched as he reached out to accept her apology. He held his head, saying it's okay and nobody got hurt anyway. It's been 30 minutes since they defeated all the monsters and Haya is still feeling sorry for her behavior. Joonseoh requested that Haya give back the necklace he gave her earlier. Haya reached into her pocket and pulled out an arrowhead-shaped ruby pendant. She gave it to Joonseoh. Joonseoh noticed that the color of the ruby has changed. Turns out the ruby is a meteoric sensation. A rare item one can only get at the A-rank dungeon, also called Burning Harpy's Refuge. This item has the ability to increase senses. When particular conditions are fulfilled, the ability is automatically activated. And the possessor's senses rapidly increase. During that time, it exceeds the scope of humanity. And you can use transcendental senses. Joonseoh handed the necklace back to Haya, thinking the problem to activate it is a difficult condition, since the possessor's emotions need to go to the extreme. For those with Haya's personality, the best method is to activate the item using extreme fear, which is why I made the situation so that she'd feel extremely afraid. Although it was going to be difficult, as long as I did it, I'd be able to awaken her. But even with the price, there were very few in the market, and Joonseoh has given up on this method. But it turns out the Overkill Guild leader was able to get it in less than 2 days. Thanks to him, things worked out easily. But this is just the start. Haya experienced being awakened through the item. She needed more practice to attain the level she'd been on in her prime. Joonseoh told Haya that her first assignment was to create a situation where you can solely kill monsters. Joonseoh further suggested Haya to change her bow. Since you're quite powerful, it should be okay for you to change from a short to a long bow and shoot from further distances. And with this Haya will interact less with monsters. Haya just stared at Joonseoh the whole time with a grateful expression, which made Joonseoh to stop his rant explanation. Haya thanked Joonseoh. He flinched, asking what? Haya said that she thought she had died without being able to do anything. She felt something from the pendant. She continued that it felt that everything around her had stopped. She also felt she could hit anything, see where to hit, the target engraved onto the monsters. Haya said even though she may be A-rank in name, her personality and everything is no better than a D-rank. She felt she had grown a lot today, and it was all thanks to Joonseoh. Joonseoh replied that it's difficult to do things alone and gave Haya his phone number. Haya blushed furiously and suggested to give Joonseoh her number in return. At the same time, Joonseoh received a message on his phone. It was Tihan telling him to contact him as soon as possible because it was an urgent situation. At the Hunter Association headquarters, Tihan talks to Joonseoh on the phone. Tihan said he will brief Joonseoh after his meeting and Joonseoh thanked him for the pendant. He said it was pretty useful. Tihan ended the call. Hisu walked in and said the association president has returned so they can move now. Hisu said the situation was uncommon since the association president summoned Tihan himself. She suggested that maybe an S-ranked gate has appeared once again. Tihan replied that it was fine since Joonseoh agreed to help. If he fight like he did back in the dungeon, there will not be any danger. He smiled, making Hisa think Tihan seems to be in a good mood after the dungeon raid. She thought it may be all because of Joonseoh. To give someone your unlimited support is really unusual for Tihan to do something like that, and his berserker class makes things harder for him to control. Tihan is more calculated and cool-headed than anyone Hisu had ever known. Even though Joonseoh is a D rank, could this attitude be because of him? The security man at the door asked Tihan if he came alone, which confused him. Tihan asked what he was talking about, to which he answered. The security guy said that from what he heard, 2 guild masters were supposed to be here today. At the same time, the security man's face brightened up as he looked behind Tihan. He says that the other seems to be here as well. A guy with purple hair shouted Tihan's name while he waved his hand. Tihan's face looked angry as he stared at him. The guy said Tihan has been active lately, but he didn't think he will be here also. Hisa thought that of that person was the only guy who seemed to piss Tihan off.